The announcement came not with the roar of a jet engine, but with the cold, sterile language of a diplomatic press release. From Berlin, Chancellor Markus Keidel declared that Germany, one of Israel's most steadfast allies, was halting all arms shipments indefinitely. The words, though quiet, triggered a geopolitical earthquake. In Tel Aviv, the news landed like a precision-guided bomb in the heart of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's war cabinet. For years, he had operated with the assurance of an unbreakable Western supply chain. Now, a critical link had been severed. The political chokehold was tightening, and the world watched, wondering who would dare to squeeze next. The answer came just hours later, from a place many in Netanyahu's circle would struggle to find on a map: Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. As the African sun beat down, President Ibrahim Traoré, a man whose youth and military fatigues belied a will of forged steel, stepped before a crowd of reporters. There was no tremor in his hand, no hesitation in his voice. He waited for the cameras to settle, his gaze sweeping over the international press corps, before finding the lens that would carry his message across continents. His voice was calm, but his words struck like thunder. We have watched nations being turned into graveyards under the guise of self-defense. Traoré began, his French words clear and sharp. Let me be clear. We take no sides in distant conflicts, but if Prime Minister Netanyahu mistakes the turmoil of the world as an opportunity to start a war in Africa, to extend his shadow over our sovereign lands, he paused, locking eyes with the camera. We will strike him back. The statement traveled faster than any missile. Within minutes, headlines flashed from Al Jazeera to CNN. African leader threatens Netanyahu with retaliation. In Tel Aviv, the war room was a pressure cooker of fury and disbelief. Traoré's image was frozen on the main screen, his eyes hard, his expression unyielding. "Who is this?" Netanyahu growled, slamming his fist on the polished table with such force that the water glasses rattled. "A captain playing president? He thinks he can challenge us?" An intelligence chief spoke, his voice tense. "Prime Minister, his influence is growing in the Sahel. He sees our contractors, our security partnerships as a threat." Netanyahu's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. This was not just geopolitics, it was an insult, a direct, personal challenge from a leader he considered insignificant. He looked at the frozen image of the young Burkinabe president and saw not a statesman, but a nail sticking up, demanding to be hammered down. This is not his fight, Netanyahu seethed as his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Not yet, but he will soon learn what happens when he makes it his fight. The order was unspoken, but understood by everyone in the room. A line had not just been drawn in the sand, it had been carved in stone, and a response was already being planned. In the chess game of global power, pawns are not supposed to talk back. They are meant to be moved, sacrificed, and forgotten. But on a day when a king was suddenly checked, a figure the world had underestimated stood up and rewrote the rules of the entire game. This is the story of how one man's words became a weapon, and how a continent decided it would no longer be a chessboard. Before we dive into the confrontation that shook the world to its core, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that like button so you don't miss what happens next. And let us know in the comments, who do you think really holds the power? Now let's begin.
While the world's headlines focused on the war of words, the real conflict had already moved underground, into the silent, invisible realm of shadows and signals. In the digital ether that connected continents, a ghost network of Israeli intelligence was tightening its grip on West Africa. For months, it had operated with impunity. Under the guise of agricultural development projects and private security contracts, Mossad-linked contractors were mapping the region's vast mineral wealth, the cobalt, the uranium, the gold. They weren't just drawing maps, they were drawing a noose. Intelligence reports on Traoré's desk, compiled by his small but fiercely loyal intelligence service, showed a web of shell corporations, disguised mining operations, and clandestine airstrips stretching from the coast of Sierra Leone to the borders of Niger. It was the spine of a neo-colonial enterprise designed to extract resources while keeping the continent dependent and divided. But Ibrahim Traoré was not a man who waited for the serpent's bite. While his public demeanor remained one of iron calm, his nights were spent on secure lines, forging a new kind of alliance. The calls went out to Bamako, Niamey, and Conakry. To his brothers-in-arms in Mali, Niger, and Guinea, leaders who had also cast off the yoke of foreign puppeteers, he spoke not of fear, but of necessity. "They see us as isolated islands," he told the Malian president in a late-night call. "They believe if they sink one, the others will not notice the tide rising. We must show them we are a single coastline." Together, they began sharing intelligence, pooling resources, and watching the watchers. A quiet pact was forged, a promise that an attack on one would be an attack on all. The breakthrough came on a humid Tuesday evening. An analyst in a dimly lit monitoring station beneath the presidential palace in Ouagadougou flagged an encrypted transmission bouncing through a satellite link in Djibouti. It was a high-priority channel, one they had only recently managed to crack with the help of Malian intelligence. After hours of decryption, a single, chilling phrase emerged from the garbled code. It was a message from Tel Aviv, intended for a field operative. It was not a battle plan. It was a promise. "If the lion roars, we'll cut its tongue." The translated message was placed on Traoré's desk. He read it once, then again. There was no anger in his expression, only a profound, cold clarity. The time for words was over. Netanyahu was not seeking to warn him. He was preparing to silence him. Traoré looked at his defense minister, whose face was grim. "So they think we are prey," Traoré murmured, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of a coming storm. He tapped the paper. "Let's show them we have teeth." In the war room, the glowing maps of Africa were no longer just strategic overviews. They were becoming a hunting ground, and the hunt was about to begin. In a sterile safe house in a quiet Ouagadougou suburb, the air was thick with the scent of gun oil and focused adrenaline. The team leader, a man known only as Oren, a veteran of Mossad's most shadowy operations, laid out suppressed rifles and encrypted radios. His face, etched with the scars of past conflicts, was impassive as he briefed his four-man team. "The objective is not assassination," he stated, his voice a low growl. "It's extraction. We take him alive. The message from Tel Aviv is clear. Humiliation sends a stronger message than martyrdom." They were ghosts, professionals at the peak of their craft, sent to pluck a king from his castle and parade him before the world in chains. Meanwhile, at the presidential palace, Captain Idrissa Cabaret, Traoré's head of security, burst into the president's private study. "Mr. President," Cabaret said, his voice tight with urgency, "a foreign hit team has entered the city. Their target is you." He pointed to a live drone feed on a large screen, showing a convoy of unmarked SUVs weaving through the back roads, avoiding every checkpoint with practiced ease. Traoré set down his pen. He had been reviewing reports on a new irrigation project. He looked at the screen, his expression unreadable. "Netanyahu wouldn't send a warning without sharpening the blade," he said calmly. "It seems the blade is here." He did something then that defied all security protocols. He waved off Cabaret's suggestion to retreat to the underground bunker. Instead, he walked to the grand balcony overlooking the palace gardens, clasping his hands behind his back. He stood there, a lone figure silhouetted against the ambient light of the city, a perfect target. "If they have come for me," he told his astonished security chief, "let them see I am not hiding. A leader who hides invites the next attack." At exactly 2 a.m.,
Sensors along the southern perimeter fence tripped. 4 masked figures moved like specters, cutting through the fence with silent tools. "Southern breach confirmed," Cabaret's voice came sharp and cold through the earpieces of the hidden presidential guard. "All units, move!" The moment the intruder set foot in the garden, the trap was sprung. Massive floodlights blasted on, turning the night into a harsh, sterile day. The intruders, momentarily blinded, reacted with instinct, tossing flashbangs toward the guard posts and surging forward. But as they advanced toward the main staircase, where Traoré stood watching hidden firing ports along the palace walls, unleashed a precise, disciplined volley. The shots were not aimed at their chests, but at their legs. 2 of the commandos went down instantly, with their limbs torn out from under them. The others scrambled for cover, pinned down by a perfectly orchestrated crossfire. Through his sniper scope, Oran saw him clearly. Traoré, standing unshaken on the steps, flanked now by 2 guards. The president descended the stone stairs, his boots striking the ground with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm, until he was just meters from where Oran crouched behind a toppled planter. Gunfire echoed around them, mixing with the thick scent of night-blooming jasmine. "You crossed continents to take me," Traoré's voice carried over the chaos. "But here, in my land, you answered to me." In that instant, Oran knew. They were not the hunters. They were the prey, and they had walked straight into the lion's den. This wasn't a palace. It was a fortress, and the mission had catastrophically failed.
The surviving intruders were dragged into the palace's lower security wing, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. Every camera in the corridor was rolling. Traoré wanted a record of this failure. In the main interrogation room, the air was heavy and cold. The Israeli team leader, Oran, sat at a bare steel table, his wrists bound, a smirk still fixed on his split lip. He had been through worse. President Traoré entered alone, closing the heavy door behind him. He didn't sit. He circled the table, his presence filling the small room. "You were sent to take me," he began, his tone disarmingly calm. "But you failed, and now you will tell me who sent you, or you will disappear into a place where names are forgotten." Oran laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "You think you scare me?" "I don't want to scare you." Traoré leaned closer, his eyes steady and unblinking. "I want you to think. If I was dead, your mission would be over. But I am alive. And now your life depends on the truth." Silence was Oran's only answer, until Captain Cabaret entered and dropped a thick folder onto the table. Inside were satellite images of the team boarding a plane in Djibouti. There were transcripts of intercepted communications, flight manifests, and detailed profiles of each man. "We already know," Cabaret said flatly. "We just want to hear you say it." Oran's smirk finally vanished. He looked at the undeniable proof of his compromised mission, exhaled slowly, and the truth came out. "We were sent by Netanyahu's office. No intermediaries, direct orders." Traoré straightened, his face unreadable. "Good." Within the hour, the secure line was open, patched directly to the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. Netanyahu, expecting a panicked call from a regional ally, answered with sharp impatience. "Prime Minister Netanyahu," Traoré's voice came through the line, steady and resonating with restrained power. There was a pause on the other end, a flicker of confusion. "I believe you lost something tonight. Your men. They're alive, for now." Netanyahu's voice was venomous. "You're playing a dangerous game, Traoré." "That is the difference between us," Traoré replied, his voice cutting through the static. "You play games. I fight wars, but only when I must. And if you think sending assassins into my land is not an act of war, you are mistaken." Netanyahu tried to interject, to threaten, but Traoré's tone was an iron wall. "Start a war, and we will hit you back harder than you can possibly imagine. Burkina Faso will not be your Gaza, your chessboard, or your hunting ground." He ended the call. The line went dead, leaving only a deafening silence in the Jerusalem war room. The news broke before the sun was fully up. A 20-second audio clip of Traoré's final words, sharp and defiant, was leaked across social media. In Ouagadougou, the streets erupted in celebration. In Palestine, activists hailed him as a hero. Across Africa, hashtags calling him #the Lion of Africa trended for days. Western media called it reckless brinksmanship, and Israeli spokespeople denied everything, calling it political theater. But the footage of the captured mercenaries, bruised and defeated, circulated alongside the audio. The world had heard the roar, and now it had seen the lion's teeth. The board had been reset, and Traoré now controlled it.
In the sealed, soundproof war cabinet in Jerusalem, there was no shouting. The humiliation was too deep for that. The leaked call had turned Netanyahu into a global pariah in some circles and a subject of mockery in others. He had lost the open fight, and he had lost the shadow war. Now he would begin the unseen war. If Traoré thinks he can challenge us without consequence, he is mistaken, Netanyahu said, his voice a low, cold whisper, his eyes locked on his intelligence chief. We will not move against him directly. We will move in a way no one can trace. We will turn his allies against him. We will starve his projects before they take root. We will make his people believe their new hero is their new curse. The ripples began subtly. A planned trade agreement with a West African bloc stalled without explanation. A critical shipment of construction equipment from Europe was delayed indefinitely over customs issues. Anonymous articles began surfacing in international media, penned by concerned analysts, accusing Traoré's administration of corruption and human rights abuses, claims with no evidence, but enough to poison the well. It was a war fought with sanctions and whispers, a siege of 1,000 cuts. But in Ouagadougou, Traoré saw the strategy for what it was. He gathered his core team in the palace strategy chamber, the walls lined with maps of trade routes and economic corridors. They are trying to starve us without firing a single shot, he said, pointing at a map showing the frozen projects. So we will open new doors, doors they have no keys to. His countermove was a masterclass in modern geopolitics. First, he accelerated talks with non-Western partners, bypassing the traditional financial systems controlled by his adversaries. Deals were struck with Russia for military hardware, with China for infrastructure investment, and with Turkey for advanced agricultural technology. Second, he solidified the African alliance. A message was sent to Mali, Niger, and Guinea, proposing a new formal defensive and economic pact. We stop thinking of ourselves as small nations standing alone. We are a network. If they touch one, they face us all, Traoré declared. Finally, he fought the propaganda war head-on. Burkina Faso state media, aided by independent journalists, released a flood of high-quality documentaries showcasing the nation's real development. Community-led schools, successful anti-extremist operations, and the first harvests from new irrigation projects. The narrative began to shift. Across Africa, a new sense of pride emerged. They saw a leader not just surviving, but building. The sun was sinking behind Ouagadougou when Traoré stepped onto the balcony once more. This time thousands were gathered below, their chants rolling like thunder. He raised a hand, and they fell silent. They wanted to frighten us into silence. They wanted us to kneel so they could call it peace. But peace without dignity is surrender, and we will never surrender. A roar erupted. Behind him, a massive projection lit up on the palace walls. A photo of the captured Israeli mercenaries, alive but disarmed. We do not seek war, Traoré continued, but if war comes to our door, we will answer it, and we will not answer alone. Far away, in his quiet meeting room, Netanyahu watched the live broadcast. He said nothing, but his clenched jaw betrayed the truth. Traoré had not just won the confrontation, he had turned it into a battlefield of resilience and unity, a battlefield Netanyahu could not win. In the end, it was more than a warning, it was a promise. In a time when power is measured by weapons and wealth, a young leader from Burkina Faso reminded the world of something far greater: dignity, unity, and the unbreakable will of a people who refuse to kneel. They tried to silence a man, but instead they amplified the voice of a continent. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If this story moved you, please show your support. Like this video to help us reach more people. Share it with friends who need to hear this message. Comment below with your thoughts on this powerful confrontation. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story.